All right. Next question here, Steve, is from Shanna. And she says this: I have a question about salvation in the Old Testament. Jesus was our living sacrifice so that we can go to heaven and have eternal life. The people in the Old Testament didn't have Jesus to be their sacrifice. How did people in the Old Testament achieve eternal life and go to heaven?
Right. Shannon, actually, you have that written about specifically in the New Testament. There's a passage in Romans chapter 4 where Paul is dealing with that issue precisely. One of the things that the Jews at the time that Paul was dealing with this stuff, some of the Jews believed that the believers in the Old Testament were saved by their works. And so specifically, they believed that one of the works that needed to take place before you could be saved was you had to be circumcised. And so Paul, in dealing with that in the whole issue of keeping the law for salvation, he talked about Abraham. And so this is what it says in the passage. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna read this out of an NLT because I like my New King James, but sometimes another
Modern translation.
Yeah, well, not a modern translation, but a paraphrase can many times bring some things out a little bit easier. And so this is Romans chapter 4 out of the New Living Translation. Did I just mess this up? I think I did. Give me a second here. There we go. And it says this. Get to the beginning here. It says, Abraham was humanly speaking the founder of our Jewish nation. What did he discover about being made right with God? If his good deeds had made him acceptable to God, he would have had something to boast about, but that was not God's way. For the scriptures tell us Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. When people work, their wages are not a gift, but something they have earned. But people are counted as righteous not because of their work, but because of their faith in God who forgives sinners. David also spoke of this when he described the happiness of those who are declared righteous without working for it. Oh, what joy, and he's quoting from David, oh, what joy for those whose disobedience is forgiven, whose sins are put out of sight. Yes, what joy for those whose record the Lord has cleared of sin. Now, is this blessing only for the Jews, or is it for uncircumcised Gentiles? Well, we've been saying that Abraham was counted as righteous by God because of his faith. But how did this happen? Was he counted as righteous only after he was circumcised, or was it before he was circumcised? Clearly, God accepted Abraham before he was circumcised. And circumcision was a sign that Abraham already had faith and that God had already accepted him and declared him to be righteous even before he was circumcised. So Abraham is the spiritual father of those whose faith, of those who have faith but have not been circumcised. They are counted as righteous because of their faith, and Abraham is also the spiritual father of those who've been circumcised, but only if they have the same kind of faith Abraham had before he was circumcised. And so short version, Shannon, is salvation was by faith in the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament. There's a passage in Genesis chapter 15 where God is speaking to Abraham and promising Abraham that he was going to be his shield and his great reward. And Abraham said, what do I have a need for a reward? Why do I have a need for a reward? I don't have a son. And what God said to him is, your children are going to be like the stars of the heavens in multitude. And then it says, and Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And so whether you're in the Old Testament or you're in the New Testament, it's a trust in God. That's what believe means. It's a trust in God that gives us our salvation. And that's what Romans chapter 4 is about concerning Abraham. So Abraham's the father of faith. And that's way back in the book of Genesis. So.
Okay.